Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of the Weekly Word, or should I say that this year's edition of the Weekly Word, because this is the first broadcast that I'm doing this year. And I just want to wish you a very, very happy new year. I want to speak blessings and grace and favor to your 2025. And I say that 2025 will eclipse anything that you have ever imagined, conceived, or even had in previous years. So, what we're looking at today in Pastor Agatha's newsletter this week, she talked about the topic of how far will you go? And she talked about this in the concept of worship. In the newsletter, she went ahead to talk about the fact that when God was delivering the children of Israel from the stronghold of Pharaoh, what he asked of them was to go and worship him in the wilderness. And thankfully, even though in Exodus 8:28, Pharaoh was trying to withhold them and to curtail the worship that they gave God, Moses rejected his Pharaoh's advances and chose to worship God fully. And again, we see here the example of the wise men that in Matthew chapter 2, when they came to pay obeisance to the baby Jesus in worship. Interestingly, I ended the year just writing a few thoughts on worship. And so when I saw this today, I thought the spirit is indeed one. And one of the things that God was showing me about worship, which I would just add to you in case you're wondering. So, how do I start? What is real worship? Is it just singing songs? What does it mean to worship? And God told me two things. He said, worship is costly. It's going to be expensive. It's going to involve sacrificing your comfort zone in response to what God has told you to do. We see this in the example of Abraham in Genesis 22 when he went up with his only son Isaac. And we see there the term used, he said to his son, let us go up there to go and worship. And then we see this also with the wise men when they brought prized possession to the baby Jesus to come again to worship him. And lastly, we see this in the account of Mary of Bethany in John chapter 12 when she broke her expensive oil and she anointed the feet of Jesus in worship. So, worship will involve you doing something that is sacrificial, that some might consider costly, but that lines up with God's instruction to you. But as you make the sacrifice in worship, the second thing that God told me was worship will open you to the prophetic. It will connect you to what is to come and will begin to give you insights that God has for his prized children. And again, let's look at the three examples. We see in the example of Abraham, again in Genesis 22, that Abraham was able to foretell the coming of Christ. And he said, God will provide the lamb. Many of us say Jehovah Jireh, God the provision. In the case of the wise men, they were able to see that this indeed is the promised Messiah. And they were able to get the instruction to not go back to Herod, as Herod has asked them, but to go in the line that provided safety. And lastly, Mary of Bethany, Jesus said in the account that this woman, she was anointing Jesus for his death. In other words, she kind of like pre, should I say, prophesied, or she was able to tap into the fact that this man is going to die soon for our sin and it deserves all. I think that worship is something that we should really consider as zoning into in terms of Bible study and practice this new year. And as we do that, you know what? We are going to reap so many benefits, untold benefits, that our lives will not be the same. I love how Pastor Agatha put this statement in the newsletter: wise men worship. And there I add, wise women worship. So if you are wise and you want to remain wise and you want God to bless you with untold wisdom this 2025, tap into worship and give it fully. I hope that you are able to connect with us with all of our initiatives this year, especially the prayer bootcamp, all day prayer session that we have on the last Saturday of this month. Keep your eyes peeled on the announcement and hope that you can join us. Have a very, very blessed week and see you next time.